No mai haere mai ki te hui, ko Jennifer Lay ahau, he kaimahi ahau ki Ace Aotearoa me Ako Aotearoa. And welcome to you all today, this Thursday, the end of September. Our session today has a whakatoki rather that I have chosen to start. And it's a session based on feedback and new learning. And in Te Reo Māori, the whakatoki is whaiawhia te kete mātauranga. Fill the basket of knowledge. And certainly for me, this is an opportunity to give you some support and fill your baskets of knowledge. But also in meeting with you, I get a chance to fill my own basket of knowledge to hear what's going on for you in the sector. And this one is dedicated to feedback. As you can see in the title there, leveraging learner experiences for continuous growth. These, in case you haven't come across the teaching standards, there are 17 indicators altogether, and it does give you a really clear steer about how to be a good tutor. So I find them really useful, and I know many of you do as well, for checking in about things that perhaps you could upskill in. And that's what the basis of these online sessions are about. And this particular workshop today is based on 4.2. Under the section of knowledge on the teaching standards, it's talking about the use of learner experiences to give regular and ongoing feedback. So there are the three teaching standards in particular that I'm drawing on today. We'll look at everything in this session, like other sessions, quite briefly because we only have a short time, but it is an introduction and there are links, as I said, on this last slide that you can refer to and continue to explore more. So we'll talk a little bit about feedback, of course, which is the topic for today. We're going to talk about research around some research referring to feedback, a few exercises today, and a little bit, as I said at the end, about your experience of giving feedback and how that works for you. And then finally, at the end of the session, before we close at 11:30, a chance for reflection on and and so what? What does that mean to you? So what is feedback? And I'm sure you are familiar with what it is. You work with it all the time with the learners you are with the tutors you work with. You'll be very familiar with it yourself as a learner throughout your life, receiving feedback. Formally, here's two definitions of what is feedback. It's about information provided about aspects of learners' performance, so how they are performing. And they can use that, and that could be feedback from an educator, could be from a colleague, a friend, could be feedback from a book or a computer program or an experience too. And then learners can use this feedback to confirm or fine-tune the existing knowledge, beliefs, and strategies that they have. So that's the idea around what feedback is. This I'm referring to some research from the New Zealand educational researcher, John Hattie. And whilst he's done a lot of research in the formal sector of primary and secondary school education, I think a lot of his messages and his research applies equally to the tertiary education sector. I really like this key quote from him about the most single powerful modification that enhances achievement is feedback. And there'll be a little bit more that he says as well on the next slide. So further to that previous slide, Hattie's research there talks about the important practice of giving feedback and how, as we're aware, it helps us to improve, or helps our learners to improve, helps us so we know exactly where we need to improve, and it helps us and gives us time to improve. So it's very clear what feedback is doing for our learners. I think one of the other things from reading Hattie's research is the importance of feedback being appropriate, constructive, and of course assessment based. Too often feedback is based on comparison with others. It's not specific enough. It doesn't give enough written feedback. It's very light on feedback. Maybe it's ineffective because it just gives marks as opposed to any constructive comments. And maybe it's ineffective because there's too much too. I've suffered myself from receiving feedback that is overwhelming because there's so much there to do. I know doing my master's, at times the feedback was just daunting. I know it's meant to be helpful, but some people's feedback style can be just overwhelming. So I like his words. It's got to be appropriate. It's got to be constructive. It's got to be based and assessment based. So that helps with any kind of feedback. This slide is talking now about levels of feedback, and I am just really want to emphasize how important this slide is from the point of view of the one in orange, feed up, as well as the one in yellow, feed forward. As I said before, I think we're familiar very much with feedback and we get a sense from our tutors. And if we're a learner, and our learners love to get that feedback on how they're going. But I think sometimes the idea of feed up and feed forward is not actually talked about. So the feed forward idea there is getting a sense of what are the learning outcomes? What do I need to work towards? Where am I going with my learning? Can my tutor, can my kaiako, can my facilitator explain that to me early? And then equally feed forward. What else could I do now? Okay, I've done this part, I've succeeded with this, I've passed this bit off, but what can I do? Where do I go? What's next? So 3 key areas of feedback, which as I said, I don't think we focus on enough, or particularly feed up and feed forward, as I said. Do ask any questions anytime in the chat as we go. Very soon, I'll give you a chance to talk about what you do as far as giving feedback to your learners. Here are some techniques that I've used and I'm familiar with, and I suspect these ideas are not new for you, but I liked it is always good just to get a sense of, so this is what feedback is. Importantly, we're very familiar with getting praise and encouragement as far as a technique and using that with our learners whenever we're working with them. Perhaps the other ones are not quite as common, but I think the idea of enabling our learners to set their own goals and for them to progress that, to monitor their progress, I think is appealing. I had the chance yesterday to visit a few sites around Ōtautahi where learners were really keen on the Pathways Awarua program. And it was lovely to see that they were self-monitoring their goals. So they had a checklist that they kept to, they had it visually in front of them in colour coding, and they could mark it off and then receive a reward when they completed the task. So they received that feedback while doing the Pathways Awarua program on quizzes. But they also received the reward by seeing clearly the goals that they set for themselves and monitoring along the way that they had achieved what they set out to achieve. Again, rubrics and checklists can be really useful for learners as well. I know for myself, having a really clear rubric will help me know exactly what I'm being marked on. And then I know that the feedback that I get will talk to the rubric or the checklist. So I know exactly where I've fallen over if I haven't completed the assignment correctly or I haven't completed the task. So, from my point of view as a learner, rubrics and checklists are helpful, along with verbal and written feedback. But I don't think every tutor, educator, kayako has the chance sometimes to give verbal and written feedback. I mean, I'm sure we'd all love to, but I'm sure we're also very conscious of the fact that we often don't have enough time, do we? We're busy keeping up with all of our learners, with all of our mahi. And so to give verbal and written feedback can sometimes be incredibly time consuming and yet incredibly rewarding, of course, for our learners. So these are the techniques that are advised, but I just want to recognise how busy all of you are in the ACE sector, and you're doing your best to do all of these things all of the time. What may be easier and more fun sometimes is setting up gamification and interactive feedback. And certainly, from my point of view, even though it may take me a bit of time, the enjoyment factor for learners when they perhaps assess themselves or get immediate feedback from a quiz game like something like Kahoot can be really useful. And there'll be other types of gamification and interactive ways that you're giving feedback. And again, that can be really rewarding for learners to see that they've completed certain levels, they've moved up. And a lot of learning these days is based on the achievement of levels and achievement of certificates or badges by completing various tasks. So all of that learners are enjoying as far as a technique for realizing that the feedback indicates that they have learned what they set to learn as their goal. My apologies, that was a really long sentence, wasn't it? But thanks for keeping up with me about that. Okay, let's move on to looking now at some true or false questions. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions. They'll come across the screen shortly. And just please in the chat, or if you don't want to share, just write down for yourself what you think they are, true or false. I suspect they'll be quite straightforward, but there we go. I just thought it was a different way of thinking about feedback by thinking about true or false. So please do write in the chat what you think, or if you would like, please put your hand up to speak too. That would be great. Okay, so here's our first true or false question. That's the first one. Focus on feedback that encourages learners to think. So please, can you let me know if you think that's true or false? Anyone like to talk about that? All right, I've moved on already. Anyone like to talk about that one, the first one? Lots of people put true. Thanks, Judith. Thanks, Frank. Yeah. Any other ideas on that? True? Yeah, lots. Thanks. I can see some of you nodding your heads there. Great. Thank you. All right, let's move on. Thanks, Saron. Let's move on to the next one for true or false. A learner's work is not ready for feedback when the work doesn't demonstrate any understanding. So this quote is suggesting reteach instead. So what's your thoughts on that? Should it be we give feedback then, or do we just reteach? Because you can tell that the learner doesn't understand. So do you just disregard feedback? What's your thoughts? Anyone care to share their thoughts? Please feel free to put your hand up too. So we've got false from Judith. Judith, are you happy to say why you think that's false?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
So for me, this is always a work in progress, but that statement is not really true to my experience. For example, for me, feedback can be conducted or can be done any time of the lesson, for maybe, or any time within the performance of the students. So
Yes.
like okay, what is your basis for reteaching if you don't conduct a a feedback? So which means even if the learners or the students seem to be not really learning well from your standard, from the
Yes.
teacher's standard, the
Yeah.
more that the teacher has to do
Yes.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
feedbacking. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, I agree. You put that beautifully. Thank you. Thanks so much, Judith. Any other comments from anyone else? Okay, let's move on. Let's look at the next one. There's just 5 of these. And Dawn, you've just put something there. False, as can use this feedback. Know the learner, getting to know what they know and what they don't know. I like that. Thanks so much, Dawn. That's really helpful. Always focus on surface features, spelling and punctuation and effort at the expense of meeting the learning criteria. It's probably quite obvious, this one, isn't it? I know, but anyway, yeah. How many of you, though, do get feedback all the time which does focus on spelling and punctuation only? Um, and I think sometimes it is hard to ignore it. I know I find it tricky to ignore as an educator, but at the same time, it's remembering it's about the learning criteria, what the learner is trying to assist us with, or show us that they know. That they're meeting that criteria is important. Yeah, false, false, false. Lots of those. Great. Thanks for your comments there. Okay, next one. Feedback is about mistakes that educators observe. That's interesting. It's about mistakes that educators observe. What do you think? False? What was that from the last time? Any new comments there? Any new ideas? Yes. The anyone? Couldn't be an indicator of understanding. What do you mean there, Noho? No, not there. What about you, Vanessa? I like that. Do you mind talking about that a little bit more, please?
Oh, yeah, yeah, sure. That's a phrase I heard years ago. There's no failure, only feedback. It's almost like we need to make so-called mistakes in order to learn and improve and get better, but it's not really a mistake. But
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Thanks very much for sharing it. Just writing it down. There's no failure, only feedback. Yeah, great. So it's not only about mistakes. Yeah. So thank you for that. Let's move on to the last one of the true and false. Feedback may be written, verbal, and digital. That's again probably quite an obvious one. So it doesn't only have to be one way. It's a variety of different ways. True. Thanks so much, Judith, for that. Okay, so there's some of that was a little bit straightforward. I'm going to move on now to another exercise. So this is a different kind of exercise, and after this exercise, you'll have a chance to talk yourselves about the type of feedback that you give. So this activity is going to be whether the sentence is positive or negative. And there are 6 of these. So I will be interested in hearing from people what they think about these. They're a little bit more complex than the true false. So here's our first one. Returning a test assignment 2 weeks after it is completed, or returning a test assignment the next day. Can you tell me which one is positive out of those two? Anyone like to share 1A or 1B?
For me, neither is negative, which means that sometimes it depends upon the length, the value, or the weight of the assignment. when we talk about test, which is just, like the true or false, for example, and matching type, and depending on the context and the topic. So, which means for me, from my experience, I can easily return the result the following day.
Yes.
Or when I say the following day, it could be the next session.
Yes.
However, if the test is like a comprehensive review, so I think the teachers are also allowed, or meaning have the privilege to return it around, 2 weeks or 1 week or 2 weeks,
Yeah.
even in the tertiary level, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
teachers are given that allowance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Judith.
Thank you.
And I like that. The neither one, it depends really on the context, doesn't it? I think the message though that sits behind this is the timeliness of it.
Mhm.
Certainly, I know for my son at the moment he's studying, and there have been months that have gone by and he hasn't received feedback. Now, I don't think that's appropriate. Not going to say who is doing that, but I don't think that is appropriate. So I think it's the timeliness of it, so that, long after the face-to-face classes are finished, people are still receiving feedback, I think actually a good thing. And perhaps this doesn't happen too much in the ACE sector. And I think as a whole, ACE educators are very good at giving timely feedback. So Ron, did you have a question, please?
I think the next day is too early, but 2 weeks is too long. Maybe 1 week.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think as Judith said, it will depend. Sometimes we can easily give a test back and we mark it and get it back to the learner. But sometimes 2 weeks is too long. So good conversation around that. Let's move on to our next ideas here. So the first one, is this positive, giving immediate oral responses to questions? Or B, ignoring errors or misconceptions. So, what do you think is positive or negative there?
Sure thing. I think, yeah, giving immediate oral response to the questions is positive. So then you're acknowledging the learner's input,
Yes.
and then applying it to the session or a particular workshop or class that you're taking, and then seeing how that fits within the learning or the learning outcomes that you're trying to produce for that
Yep.
session.
Good.
But then, yeah, ignoring errors or misconception, I think that would be a negative experience for a learner, because then that leaves them thinking, oh, what was I right? Was I
Yes.
on the right track?
Yes.
And it's about like facilitating that. And I think there's an art to giving feedback when it's not quite where you want to lead the conversation or the session towards.
Yes. Yeah. I think you're very right there. Thank you, Frank, for explaining that. It is an art, isn't it? When I ask a question and maybe I don't get the right answer. So what do I do? Yeah. And what I do is I invite other people to give their responses. But it is a fine art ensuring that everyone's voice is heard and people aren't left to feel a failure because of the feedback they receive. So thank you, Frank, for your response. Let's move on to the next screen now. So we're looking at what's positive, what's negative of these two. 3, point out every error is A. B, select 2 or 3 main points to comment on in learners' work. So maybe it's open to interpretation, but which one do you think is best? Which one is positive? 3A or 3B? Which one is negative? And Judith, you've put 3A as negative and 3B is positive. Again, do you mind sharing? Oh, thank you, Saron. I can see your child with you. It's lovely. Lovely to see. Thanks. But Judith, do you mind telling us why you put 3A as negative, please?
Yes. I'll put it in the context of teaching English for employees or teaching English as an ESOL.
Yeah.
So it's for me, it's not good to point out all the errors like punctuation marks, pronunciation, etc. Together or at the same time. Rather, I just try to summarize all the the main points under consideration,
Yes.
depending again within the context of the lesson, within the context of the cultural experience of the learners,
Lovely.
depending on their goals, and then
Yes.
towards their outcomes.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Judith. And Leah, have you happy to talk about 3B, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, I just had a tutoring session just the last hour, and so this
Yeah.
was just there was a question and she completely kind of missed the mark on what the question was.
Yeah.
But instead of like coming down on her and pointing out every error,
Yeah.
I, for example, said, what you've written is actually really good if it was a different question. And then
Right.
when I explained the question to her, she could see the errors herself, like she picked them up.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it was like getting her to see it herself and then praising her on what she did do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thanks so much, Leah. What were you teaching?
Oh, I'm a tutor for vet nursing
Right.
for Otago Polytech.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks. Yeah.
like a student support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you. That's really helpful to share that, because from my point of view as a learner, and I'm sure many of you feel the same, there's nothing worse than receiving feedback, the good old days where people used a red pen and marked it with red pen and put circles around it or crossed it out. It's like every error. And I've seen that. I've received it myself, and I've seen other educators do it. Maybe not so much in tertiary education, but still sometimes some areas they do. So I love your scenario of enabling the learner, the tauira, to find the errors herself, Leah. That's really great story. So you're guiding and teaching the student with the feedback, but the best of all, they're learning themselves about what works, what bit and what parts of their own learning have been successful. Fantastic. Susan, thank you. 3B is preferable, but I'd like to offer to go over any other queries the learner might have. Yeah, I like that too. Thanks so much, Susan. I appreciate you sharing that. That's really adding to it, isn't it? In case, there are some learners that actually want to know every point. So thanks, Susan. Are you happy just to say a couple of words about that? If you unmute.
Thank you, Judith. Jennifer, just that so often a learner is aware that they have other areas that they would like feedback on. So I always try and suggest at another time or in another situation, we could also look at those
Nice.
areas.
What do you?
Although I think it's really good to also 3B sounds more positive because you're just working on 2 or 3 main points at the time.
What are you teaching, Susan?
I'm teaching English, but also I have some learners with specific learning disabilities, and so I try to accommodate them when they need it, when they need help.
Great. Thanks so much, Susan. Thank you. Let's move on to our next ideas here. What one is positive, which one is negative? So number 4A is saying provide huge comments on poor work and almost nothing on good work. And 4B is commenting on as many strengths as weaknesses. What's your thinking around that? Which one is positive? Which one is negative? And why? I know. Thank you for those of you who are writing it in the chat. It's really lovely to hear your opinions there. So do you put lots of feedback for poor and good? What are you thinking here? So again, Frank, you think B is positive? Yeah, and A, Judith, is negative and B is positive. And Noha, A is negative and B is positive. Noha, can you mind telling us a little bit about why you said that, please?
Kia ora, Jennifer. Just because, yeah, if you ignore all the good work, people lose motivation.
Yes.
And you've always pointing out their mistakes is, yeah, a bit degrading and frustrating as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Noha, for recognizing that, sharing that with us, and very similar thoughts from you too there, Leah. Negative because the student doesn't receive any encouragement at all. Yeah. And so without it, all of us really get discouraged. So thanks very much again. Just two more of these on the next screen. So two more. Number 5A. Use written feedback comments that learners can save and look over. Is that positive or negative? Out of 5B, speak to learners to save yourself the trouble of writing comments. So this again could depend on the context, and certainly, as I said earlier, we often run out of time. But what do you think is the most positive out of those two, 5A or 5B? So again, feel free to write those in the chat. Thank you. So we've got a couple of messages there. Thanks, Jeanette. 5B is positive and 5A is positive. Oh, you put situational, Judith. Yeah. And Leah, again, A is positive, but you can also give verbal feedback and praise. I like that. Yes. And Jeanette, 5A. Yeah. Do you mind telling us why you put that, Jeanette, please?
I think it's nice for people to have things written down so they can go back and reflect on them,
Yes.
and that process of reflection is ongoing. So I think you can look at something, reflect on it, learn from it, and then come back again with a new learning.
Yes. Yeah.
Depending on the depth of feedback as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great. Thanks so much for that. It's really helpful to hear from you too, Jeanette. And a lot of you are saying the same thing, and very similarly that okay, it's good to have spoken comments as well, but to have it supported by the written is the most positive. So our last two ideas here are number 6A, communicate with individual learners giving specific feedback, or 6B, use, say, the same feedback for all learners. And again, sometimes you might want to do that. Certainly, I know teachers who used to cut and paste the same thing for all learners. Dare I say that? Perhaps I've done it myself. Sorry. No. At times it can be daunting, can't it? If we're depending on if we're teaching formal sector classes of 30 plus, it's really tricky to give different feedback. But I think with our ACE learners, let's see what you're putting there. Most ACE learners want specific feedback that's directed specifically at them. So 6A is certainly the most positive there. Anyone have any comments there? Thank you. I see that Judith, 6A. Yeah, 6A positive. So on. Yeah. So sometimes thank you, Judith. What would you like to say there?
Oh yeah, thank you. Just quickly. So for me, again, 6A and 6B would depend on the context, and then the rubric, for example. There are some tests or assessments or feedback process that would just need general, or maybe, for example, in my case, breakout room. And then the breakout room leaders would report to the main room, learners. And so it would be depend whether, okay, the group is performing like this or like that, and then the comment would be general, or the feedback would be general. But again, in saying so, there are some activities or tasks that would need, a specific or individual feedback. So I say it depends, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it can depend. And thanks for that feedback. And I think Susan is saying something very similar there too. That, at times you may have to do that, but it's important to make sure that the learners know that everyone is getting the same feedback. So Frank, can you talk to that, please? You've written a bit there. Thank you for writing it. But what do you want to say there?
It was just a recent, a training that I did a while back, and it was more around organizational psychology, but like working in teams. And say you were project leading, and the trainer had said that there's this golden ratio that they've heard that research has been conducted, that there's like a 5-to-1. So for one area that you're giving feedback on for someone to work on, or for a learner to work on, you got to combine that with 5 areas of strength, and then that ensures that there's motivation that carries on. And so I've just kind of kept that in my head when I am trying to provide feedback, either to other staff members or to learners as well, is that for this one that I'm thinking about that is a work on, I've got to match it with 5 that are areas of strengths or things that they did well within that specific task or project that we're working on.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that, Frank. It reminds me of the similar idea around giving compliments to people too. I think it's 4-to-1, but you get the same idea there, that it's about the importance of hearing the positive and the strengths, as opposed to being overwhelmed by those areas that people need to work on. Thanks so much, Frank. All right, here's a chance now. I didn't pause, sorry. Here's a chance now, though, for everyone to talk in a breakout room. So you can have 5 minutes in your breakout room to share your teaching, what you do, but importantly, how you give feedback to your learners. What are you doing? What's your favoured way of working with your learners? Well, hopefully the idea of the breakouts does give you a chance to connect with other people in more smaller groups. So I just want to wrap up with one final slide now, a final slide of content. And that's the idea of giving feedback. And I know a lot of this has come up anyway, particularly in the true and false and the positive and negative, but I thought this list here really helped by being very clear about that feedback loop, the importance of it being timely. I think we talked about that earlier. That's the third one. Sorry, I'll start at the top. So the first one is individualizing the feedback as much as possible. So trying very hard to be specific to the learner that you're engaging with, so they can continue to reach their own learning outcomes. It's always important to be genuine. Perhaps people are using AI sometimes to write their feedback. And whilst AI is a useful tool, sometimes maybe the learner might feel it's not genuine from the tutor, the kayako. I'm not sure. Yeah, just need to keep working with that until AI finds your own voice. Now, some of you, of course, will be incredibly genuine with their feedback, but I'm just saying that I think sometimes we may be moving towards using artificial intelligence sometimes to give that feedback. And is it genuine? We've already talked about the importance of it being timely, making sure we don't leave learners waiting for months to ever hear from their feedback. Again, specificness is really clear, making it clear, and again, we've talked briefly about that. I like the next one too, isn't it? About enabling our learners to learn how to be good at giving feedback. So I know that one's later. This is, so basically the idea is learning from a good example. So it is learners learning, but it's using the example of other good feedback here. The next point is around addressing some issues by making it a check-in, really, not so much a opportunity to give feedback, but just checking in and checking how the learner's going, how you're keeping to the rubric, how you're keeping to your learning outcomes, how you're keeping to your goals. Always important to notice effort and achievement and be transparent in that. And here's the one I talked about earlier, sorry about that, but this is the idea around teaching learners to give feedback. So not only are they learning and getting feedback from you, they're learning how to give constructive feedback. And importantly, welcome always feedback from learners. And again, I welcome that feedback from each of you. So lovely to get some comments of feedback there. Thank you for that. But I am moving to the next slide as we finish off for the session. If there were any thoughts or reflections, any questions, anyone wants to just check in here before we finish. But thank you for your time. Thanks for thinking about feedback and what you do. Thanks too for reflecting and thinking yourself, what could you do and change to your practice? That's the so what. What's your reflection today on having attended this session? What more could you do in the way that you give feedback? Are you being as user-friendly as possible? Are you being transparent? Are you being timely? Are you making sure it's clear and purposeful? At times, it would be good to teach adult learners too, so they're aware of feed up, feedback, and feed forward. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. So hopefully, as I said, you've all thought of something today that you'll work on. I know that many of you like to share that, so feel free to do so, but good luck with your ongoing learning around feedback and contributions to giving feedback to your learners. I want to close with our karakia whakamutunga. Kua mutu a mātou mahi mō tēnei wā, manakitia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, o ki te rangi. Peace to you all. Have a lovely rest of your Thursday and rest of your week. And thank you again for being here and sharing your knowledge.